Sarah Mitchell had been a nurse for 11 years, but she had never seen someone look so utterly defeated. The elderly man sat slumped in the waiting room chair, his weathered hands trembling slightly as they rested on his knees. His clothes were clean but worn thin at the edges, and his shoes had seen better days. What struck Sarah most was the hollowness in his eyes, a kind of emptiness that spoke of more than just physical hunger. It was a Thursday afternoon at Riverside General Hospital, and the emergency room was experiencing one of those rare quiet moments between storms. Sarah had just picked up her lunch from the staff break room, a simple turkey sandwich and an apple she had packed that morning. Her stomach growled in anticipation. She had skipped breakfast to help her daughter get ready for a school presentation, and now at 2 in the afternoon, she was running on nothing but coffee and determination. The elderly man coughed softly, and Sarah noticed him glance toward the vending machines near the entrance. His hand moved toward his pocket, then stopped. He sat back with a resignation that made Sarah's heart ache. She had seen that look before, on the faces of patients who came through the ER with no insurance, no money, and no idea how they would make it through another day. Sarah walked over to him, her lunch bag still in her hand. Up close, she could see the pallor of his skin and the way his hands shook with more than just age. This was the tremor of someone who had not eaten in far too long. "Excuse me, sir," she said gently. "Are you waiting to be seen?" The man looked up at her with startled blue eyes that reminded her of winter sky. He seemed surprised that anyone had noticed him at all. He cleared his throat. "I was told to wait here. They said it might be a while. Have you eaten today?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. The man's face flushed with embarrassment. He looked down at his worn shoes. "I'm fine, thank you." Sarah glanced at the brown paper bag in her hands, then back at the man. She thought of her own father, who had passed away 3 years ago. He had been a proud man, too, the kind who would go hungry rather than ask for help. She thought of all the times she had wished someone had been there to look after him when she could not. Without another word, Sarah sat down in the chair next to him and opened her lunch bag. She pulled out the sandwich, still wrapped in wax paper, and placed it in his hands. She added the apple and a small bag of pretzels she had forgotten was in there. "Please," she said softly. "I actually ate a big breakfast this morning and I'm not that hungry. It would make me feel better if you took this." The man stared at the food in his hands as if it were made of gold. His eyes grew wet, and he blinked rapidly. "Miss, I can't, you need to eat too. I insist," Sarah said with a warm smile. "Besides, I have a whole other lunch in my locker. I always pack extra." It was a lie, but a necessary one. She could grab something from the cafeteria later, maybe just crackers and soup. It did not matter. What mattered was the look of relief and gratitude spreading across the stranger's face. The man's voice cracked when he spoke. "Thank you, you have no idea what this means." Sarah patted his arm gently and stood up. "You just take care of yourself, okay? And make sure you let the doctor know if you've been having trouble eating. They need to know these things." She walked away before he could protest further, heading back toward the nurse's station. Her stomach growled again, but she pushed the feeling aside. She had made the right choice. She always tried to make the right choice, even when it cost her something. The rest of her shift passed in the usual blur of vitals checks, medication rounds, and patient care. Sarah forgot about the sandwich and the elderly man in the waiting room as she dealt with a child who had fallen off a bike, a teenager with appendicitis, and an elderly woman having a cardiac episode. By the time her shift ended at 11 that night, she was exhausted and light-headed from having subsisted on nothing but crackers and coffee since breakfast. 3 days later, Sarah arrived at work to find the hospital buzzing with unusual energy. Nurses clustered in small groups, whispering excitedly. The administrative staff hurried past with stacks of paperwork, their faces a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. "What's going on?" Sarah asked her colleague Jennifer as she tied on her scrubs. Jennifer's eyes were wide. "You haven't heard. Mr. Harrison is here." "Harrison? He owns the hospital, Sarah. He owns half the hospitals in the state. Nobody's seen him in person for years. Apparently, he's been going through some health issues and wanted to see the hospital operations firsthand." Sarah felt a strange flutter in her stomach, though she could not say why. She went about her morning routine, checking on her assigned patients and reviewing charts. Around 10 o'clock, her supervisor appeared with an unusual request. "Sarah, could you come with me, please? There's someone who wants to see you." Confused, Sarah followed her supervisor down the hallway, through the administrative wing, and into a conference room she had never entered before. Inside, sitting at a large mahogany table, was the elderly man from the waiting room 3 days ago. But he looked different now. He wore an expensive suit. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his face had regained its color. Next to him stood a younger woman in a business suit, holding a leather portfolio. Sarah froze in the doorway. The elderly man stood up slowly and a smile spread across his face. "Miss Mitchell," he said, "or may I call you Sarah?" Sarah's supervisor touched her elbow gently. "Sarah, this is Charles Harrison. He owns Riverside General." The room tilted slightly. Sarah grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "You were the man in the waiting room." Mr. Harrison nodded, his eyes growing misty. "I was. I had been feeling unwell for several weeks and decided to visit one of my own hospitals as a regular patient. I wanted to see how people were really treated when nobody knew who I was. I dressed simply. I waited like everyone else. I watched and listened." He paused, pulling out a chair for Sarah. "Please, sit down." Sarah sat, her mind racing. Mr. Harrison continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I had been fasting for medical tests, and by the time I arrived that afternoon, I was weak and hungry and frankly miserable. I sat in that waiting room feeling invisible and forgotten. And then you appeared. You saw me. Not as a patient number or a nuisance, but as a human being who needed help." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of wax paper. Sarah recognized it immediately. It was the wrapper from her sandwich. "You gave me your lunch," Mr. Harrison said. "You lied and told me you had already eaten so I wouldn't feel bad about taking it. You gave me your food even though you were hungry yourself. I found out later from your colleague that you worked the rest of your shift on nothing but crackers." Sarah's face flushed. "I was just doing what anyone would do." "But that's where you're wrong," Mr. Harrison said gently. "Not everyone would do that. In fact, very few people would. I've spent 40 years in healthcare administration, and I've seen a lot of competent nurses and doctors. But compassion like yours is rare. You didn't help me because you knew who I was. You helped me because it was the right thing to do." He nodded to the woman with the portfolio, who placed a folder in front of Sarah. "I've been thinking about how to honor nurses who embody the true spirit of caregiving," Mr. Harrison said. "Nurses who see patients as people, not just cases. Starting today, Riverside General will have the Sarah Mitchell Compassion Scholarship. It will provide full college scholarships for nursing students who demonstrate exceptional kindness and character. Additionally, I'm establishing a fund to ensure no patient in this hospital ever goes hungry. There will be meals available for anyone who needs them, no questions asked." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Harrison, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll help me change the culture here," he replied. "Say you'll help me train other nurses to see patients the way you do. I'm creating a new position, Director of Patient Compassion Services. It's yours if you want it. Better hours, better pay. And the opportunity to make sure every patient who walks through our doors is treated with dignity and kindness." Sarah looked at the folder in front of her, then at Mr. Harrison's sincere face. She thought about all the patients she had cared for over the years, all the moments of connection that had made the exhaustion and sacrifice worthwhile. She thought about her daughter and the example she wanted to set. "I accept," she said softly. "Not for the title or the pay, but because I believe in what you're trying to do." Mr. Harrison smiled and extended his hand. "Then let's change healthcare together. One act of kindness at a time." As Sarah shook his hand, she realized that the small choice she had made that Thursday afternoon had rippled outward in ways she never could have imagined. She had simply seen someone who was hurting and had done what she could to help. It was the same thing she did every day. But sometimes, just sometimes, one moment of compassion could change everything. The meeting lasted another hour as Mr. Harrison outlined his vision for a more humane approach to healthcare. He talked about his own struggles with illness, about feeling vulnerable and scared, about how Sarah's simple act of kindness had reminded him why he had entered the healthcare field in the first place. He had started as a hospital orderly 50 years ago, working his way up through determination and hard work. Along the way, he had accumulated hospitals and wealth, but he had nearly lost sight of what mattered most, the human beings at the center of every medical transaction. By the time Sarah left the conference room, her entire life had shifted. She would still be a nurse, still caring for patients, but now she would have the resources and authority to create a culture of compassion throughout the entire hospital system. She would train new nurses, develop programs to prevent burnout, and ensure that financial stress never prevented good care. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with her daughter Emma, telling her about the day's events. Emma listened with wide eyes, then asked the question that cut to the heart of everything. "Mom, would you have given him your lunch if you had known who he was?" Sarah thought about it carefully. "I hope I would have," she said honestly, But the truth is, it shouldn't matter who someone is. Every person deserves kindness and dignity, whether they're homeless or own a hospital. That's what I want you to remember. The measure of our character isn't how we treat people who can reward us. It's how we treat people when nobody's watching and there's nothing in it for us. Emma nodded thoughtfully. Like you always say, do the right thing even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, Sarah agreed. In the weeks that followed, the story of Sarah's sandwich spread through Riverside General and beyond. It appeared in the local newspaper, then in nursing journals, and eventually on national news. But for Sarah, the real reward came in smaller moments, a new nurse stopping her in the hallway to ask advice on showing compassion during busy shifts, a patient thanking her for a program that provided them with a warm meal during a difficult treatment, and Mr. Harrison himself visiting the floors regularly, remembering what it felt like to be the patient in the waiting room. The Sarah Mitchell Compassion Scholarship funded its first 5 students within 3 months. The hospital's patient satisfaction scores climbed steadily. Employee retention improved. And most importantly, the culture began to shift. Nurses and doctors started seeing their work not just as a job, but as a calling to serve humanity with excellence and heart. 1 year after that Thursday afternoon, Sarah stood before a crowded auditorium of healthcare workers at a regional conference. She had been asked to speak about compassionate care, and as she looked out at the sea of faces, she thought about how one small choice had led to this moment. A sandwich, she began, is a simple thing. It cannot cure disease or mend broken bones. But on the right day, given to the right person, it can restore hope. It can remind someone that they matter. It can change a life. She paused, her voice growing stronger. We all have sandwiches to give. Not literal ones necessarily, but moments of kindness, words of encouragement, acts of compassion that cost us something but give someone else everything they need in that moment. Healthcare isn't just about medicine and technology. It's about seeing the humanity in every person we serve and responding with our own humanity. The audience rose in a standing ovation, but Sarah's thoughts were on the thousands of nurses working night shifts at that very moment, the ones caring for patients in big cities and small towns, the ones who gave their time and energy and heart every single day without recognition or applause. Those were her people. Those were the real heroes. As Sarah left the stage that day, she pulled out her phone and looked at a photo she had saved. It was the wax paper from her sandwich, wrinkled and creased, that Mr. Harrison had kept as a reminder. He had framed it and hung it in his office with a small plaque that read, "The most powerful medicine is human kindness." Sarah smiled. It was true, and it was a medicine she would spend the rest of her career prescribing. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of simple kindness, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Pure Kindness Stories. Share this story with someone who needs encouragement today. Together, we can create a world where compassion is not the exception but the expectation. Remember, you never know whose life you might change with one small act of generosity. Be the reason someone believes in goodness. Be the light in someone's darkness. And never underestimate the power of a simple sandwich given with love.